galaxy will kneel, or it will burn.
You do not remember the first time you opened your eyes beneath the twin suns. They were already watching you, not as stars, but as ancient eyes set into the ceiling of a sleeping world, waiting for you to stir. Tatooine held you not in love, but in chains. Sand clung to your ankles like ancestral whispers, a billion grains murmuring of toil, of fire, of bloodlines broken. You were born not into a cradle, but into barter. Your first lullabies were the hissing of gears and the metallic sighs of droids too weary to dream. And yet, even then, you felt it, a pulse beneath the surface of things, a rhythm behind the world. You heard it in the hum of the padracer you built from scavenged dreams. You saw it in the shimmer of heat rising from the dunes, illusions of something more. You were not told you were different. The galaxy didn't declare it with fireworks, but the stars leaned closer to listen when you spoke. Even metal responded to your fingertips, as if memory had been welded into your palms. The Force, the very fabric of meaning, curled around you in secret. You were a child of bond, yet your spirit wandered. The junkyards were your cathedral, and Watto, your reluctant priest. Shmi, your mother, held you like one clings to the last warmth in a winter that never ends. She told you stories, not of kings or warriors, but of peace, of quiet, of freedom. And though you smiled, you knew she feared the hunger in your eyes, the way you stared at the stars, not as mystery, but as destination. They came for you, with robes and riddles. A Jedi, weary, stern, questioning, saw you not with eyes, but with prophecy. You stood before him, not as a boy, but as a fracture in the current. Midi Chlorians whispered your blood's secret, a virgin birth. No father, no lineage, only purpose, only pull. You, a vessel carved by fate's own fingers, and still, you only wanted to help, to fly, to free your mother, to be something more than owned. You remember the wind, on Bunta Eve, the way the engines screamed like banshees of old war. You were not afraid. Speed was your language. Time bent to you, and in the chaos of racing steel, you became infinite. Freedom was not triumphant. It came in halves. You left with strangers, but your mother stayed. Behind her silhouette, framed in dusk, hands clasped in prayer, only you could hear. You ascended into the sky, but not into peace. The stars welcomed you with silence. Coruscant, gleaming, towering, cold, so many lights, and none of them home. They examined you like a relic. They spoke of attachments like disease. You were too old, too dangerous, too full of longing. And yet the council bent, reluctantly, cautiously. OBI-1 was given your hand, not as brother, not yet, but as guardian of a question. No one knew how to answer. You trained in halls that whispered with history, ghosts of 1,000. Jedi watched you stumble, rise, grow, but you were not like them. They let go you, held on to memories, to dreams, to the image of your mother's hands, worn but warm, to the thought of Palm, a name that bloomed like a forbidden flower in your mind. You wielded a saber, not like a tool, but like a limb. Too fast, too fierce, too full of passion. The others whispered, the council frowned, and yet none could match the way you moved. Like fire taught to walk, war erupted, but you were already burning. The galaxy split open, and you, flew into it like a storm answering its name. You did not fall, not yet, but the ground beneath. You began to shift, subtly, a hairline fracture in the mirror of your purpose. Dreams came of sand, of screams, of your mother, her voice a fading echo in the dusk. You returned to to truth. Too late. You found her in chains, still, her body broken, breath rasping like a wind dying in the canyon. She looked at you, and her eyes once full of sun, now clouded with twilight. And then, she was gone. Something shattered. It wasn't the Force. It was your name. You raged. The sand turned red, and for the first time, the darkness did not frighten you. It welcomed you, soft and warm, like an old blanket found in grief. The council did not see, or chose not to. They spoke of balance. But your scales were already tipped, and through it all, she remained Padme, glowing, distant, real. You loved her not, as the Jedi warned against, but as the universe aches for itself. She was not salvation, she was anchor, and yet, even love, bent beneath the weight of destiny. You stand now in memory, in shadow, a child of prophecy, a boy no longer. Twin suns burn behind your eyes, and in the silence of reflection, you hear them whisper still. You were never meant to belong. You were meant to awaken to rupture, to change the course of everything. But not yet, not yet. You close your eyes, and the wind sounds like breathing. You awaken inside the dream, and the dream is war. The Clone Wars do not ask for you, they devour you. What began as a mission becomes a crucible, and you no longer, the boy from the sands, become legend. But even legends bleed. You soar through the stars with wings made of fire, leading battalions whose names you forget, but whose deaths you carry in silence. You speak through a blade now, a blue light carving justice into the void. Yet justice feels further with every planet saved. They call you General Skywalker, hero of the Republic, and the weight of the title pulls against your skin like armor that cannot breathe. Beside you is Ahsoka, apprentice, not by tradition but by rhythm. Her footsteps echo your rebellion. Her eyes reflect the storm inside you. You teach her not what the Jedi ask, but what the war demands. How to win, how to lead, how to survive. And still, something in you softens for her. In her, you remember who you were. But the war keeps moving, and softness is a language drowned out by the scream of blasters and the silence after the dying. You find Pob again, not in peace, but in hiding. You hold her in corridors, behind locked doors, in moments carved out of chaos. Love is not forbidden anymore. It is sacred, fragile, endangered. Her touch is the only place you are not burning. Yet visions haunt you like smoke under the skin. Dreams of her dying, screaming, reaching, and you unable to stop it. The future becomes a prison made of images you cannot explain and cannot bear. You go to the council, to the Jedi, and they speak of detachment like it is salvation. But you are not a ghost. You have loved, you have lost. You cannot forget your mother's final breath, cannot pretend Pob is just another ripple in the Force. And so, when they deny you the rank of master, when they question your loyalty, it cuts deeper than betrayal. It confirms what you've always known. They do not understand you. You are not just a warrior, not just a tool of prophecy. You are a storm given shape. You are fury in search of meaning. And then he comes Palpatine, whose words wrap around your doubts like silk dipped in honey. He does not preach detachment. He speaks of power, of control, of ending death itself. He tells you of Darth Plagueis, of knowledge hidden from the Jedi, of promises older than the code, and you listen, not because you hunger for power, but because you fear loss more than darkness. You would walk through fire to save her. You already have. You begin to unravel quietly. Every battle you win echoes louder with questions the Jedi refuse to answer. Every life you take blurs the line between protector and destroyer. And all the while, Padme grows heavier with the child you never thought you'd deserve. A child of love born in secrecy, a heartbeat you can feel in your dreams. But even this joy is shadowed, for in your visions, she still dies. You kneel in temples older than the war, begging for a way to stop time. You touch the Force not as a stream, but as a storm. And then the Council sends you to spy on Palpatine. The betrayal becomes complete. You are the chosen one, yet they do not trust you. You are the weapon, but not the wielder. And when the moment comes, when Palpatine reveals himself, when the masks fall, when the words Sith Lord echo like a thunderclap, you do not strike. You hesitate. You falter. You choose. You choose not with your saber, but with your fear. You see Padme dying. You see a world without her. And so, when Mace Windu raises his blade to kill Palpatine, you intervene. You scream. You strike. You fall. In that single breath, Anakin Skywalker begins to die. The Jedi Temple burns. You walk through its ashes like a god unchained. You kill the ones who raised you. You silence the voices who once whispered your name with reverence. Even the younglings, their eyes wide, uncomprehending, fall before your blade. You tell yourself it is for peace, for Padme, for the child. But something deeper howls within you, a truth without name. You have already become the thing you feared. And yet, Padme still reaches for you. She comes to Mustafar with tears in her eyes, love in her voice, hope clinging to her like morning mist. And you, eyes burning yellow with betrayal, do not see her. You see a lie. You see Obi-Wan behind her. You see treachery. You raise your hand, and she falls. Not from your blade, but from your rage. And when Obi-Wan steps forward, it is not as brother, but as executioner. You fight not for glory, but for the last shards of your soul. Mustafar becomes the end of everything. You burn him. He burns you. Limbs fall. Screams echo. Lava dances like laughter. And when you are left crawling, smoldering, broken, it is not death that finds you. It is fate. Palpatine gathers your pieces. Metal replaces flesh. Breath becomes machine. Voice becomes filtered. You awaken on a slab, and the first thing you ask is of her, where is Pod? His answer is a lie, dressed in silence. She is gone. You killed her. And in that moment, what little was left of Anakin Skywalker vanishes into the void. You rise, not as man, but as mask. You breathe through the hiss of servos. You walk through corridors, lit by fear. You serve an empire built on the grave of a republic you once bled for. The stars do not sing for you anymore. The Force, once a song in your bones, now recoils from your touch. And still, somewhere in the dark, a whisper remains. A name, a memory, a flicker. Skywalker. You cannot kill it. You cannot bury what you were. And so you walk, armor gleaming, saber red, searching not for peace, but for silence. You drift. through years like a phantom in armor, no longer chasing destiny, but becoming the consequence of it. The galaxy bends around your presence, planets kneel in silence, and whispers of Darth Vader travel further than light itself. You are a myth, wrapped in steel, a name children fear and rebels curse. The halls of your Star Destroyer echo with obedience, not loyalty. Those who stand too long in your shadow vanish, and still it brings you no peace. Every world you crush, every system you bend, is but an echo of the moment you lost her. Your breath is mechanical, constant, a reminder of the price you paid to save what was already fading. The Empire grows, a monolith built on terror, yet the silence between your steps grows louder. There are moments, quiet, unwanted, when you see her in the reflections of glass, in the dreams you pretend not to have. Pob, maffing, reaching, forgiving. But you are no longer Anakin. That name is buried beneath ash and metal, and yet it follows you. In the Force, you feel tremors, a presence, a boy, hidden, burning, curious. Luke, a name whispered first by enemies, then by the Force itself. A child you did not raise, but who carries your blood like a blade. He moves through the galaxy like you once did, reckless, radiant, raw, and he believes. He believes in good, in the Jedi, in you. It is unbearable. You chase him not as a hunter, but as something older, as fate hunting its reflection. You offer him power. You reach not as a tyrant, but as a father who has forgotten how to hold anything gently. He refuses, again and again, and still he sees you, not the mask, not the blade, but something beneath. He says your name as though it still matters. Skywalker. He throws away his saber, not in defiance, but in faith. You raise yours in response, high, ready, demanded by your master. Palpatine's laughter cracks the sky, and lightning burns the boy who believed in you. And in that scream, in that moment, the machine pauses. You watch him writhe. You see Dem. You see Shmi. You see the child you were, the darkness you became, and the choice you were too afraid to make. This time, you choose. You lift. The Emperor, with broken fingers, electricity crawling across your spine. You scream. You burn. Again. But this time, it is a cleansing. It is not rage. It is return. The throne shatters. The master dies. And in the quiet that follows, your breath slows. You fall beside your son, the boy who saw the man buried beneath the monster. You remove your mask, not to reveal horror, but to feel wind again, skin against air, eyes against stars. You look at him and smile, not as Vader, not even as Anakin, but as a father finally awake. Your voice is weak, but true. You tell him to go, to live, to remember. You feel the Force around you, not as weapon or command, but as warmth, light. You become light. You fade, not into darkness, but into memory. Later on Endor, when the fires rise and the masks melt, your name is whispered again, Skywalker. They do not know the whole of it. They never will. But he knows. Luke. He carries you, not in shame, but in hope. The galaxy begins again. The night ends. And far away, beneath unseen suns, the sand stirs. The Force breathes. And somewhere in the stillness of the stars, you remain, not as the chosen one, not as the broken one, not as the fallen, but as the one who returned, the one who remembered, the one who was loved. You are no longer afraid. You walk through, The halls of the Jedi Temple with footsteps that echo more loudly than your breath, for silence is sacred here, not peaceful, not gentle, but watchful, etched into the stone like ancient warnings. They gave you robes, they gave you rules, they gave you a name, but it was not yours, not truly. It was a name of containment, of order, of obedience. Padawan Knightmaster, titles stacked like armor, each meant to quiet the thunder in your blood. And still, the fire inside you never dimmed. You were taught to let go of attachments, to sever desire like a dead limb, but your heart refused to forget the warmth of hands once held, the promise of something beyond duty. You memorized the code not because it spoke to you, but because you had to survive inside its cold beauty. Every morning you rose with the twin burdens of prophecy and expectation pressing against your ribs. The council watched you like a mirror, waiting to crack, never quite saying what they feared, but never letting you forget it either. You were the chosen one, and yet never chosen fully. They trusted your power, but not your spirit. They wanted the light, not the flame. You sparred in training halls where the ghosts of 1,000 Jedi echoed in every strike, and with every duel, every flourish of your saber, you moved faster, harder, closer to something unspoken. The Force wrapped around you, not like wind, but like wildfire, intoxicating, total, too much. And Obi-Wan, your brother, your anchor, stood near, but never fully understood. He taught you as best he could, but you always heard the doubt behind his lessons, the fear in his silences. He saw the edges of you, sharp and glowing, and wondered how long before they cut something sacred. And Ahsoka, her presence was different. Not master nor student, but something truer. She asked questions you had buried. She walked away when the temple betrayed its own silence, and in her absence, you saw the cracks more clearly. The temple had rules, but not mercy, discipline, but not wisdom. You stood in the council chamber, looking out at the endless city of Coruscant, and wondered if the Order had become its own prison. There were whispers, even then, rumors of Sith, of unrest, of a galaxy trembling just beneath the surface. And still the Jedi meditated, spoke in riddles, planned in shadows. You wanted to act, to strike, to save, but they told you to wait, always wait. The war brought a strange kind of freedom. Out there, beyond the temple walls, your choices mattered. Out there, you were not a question, you were a sword. You led clones into battle, not with doctrine, but with heart. You made mistakes, you bled. You saw fear in the eyes of your enemies, and began to understand the power it carried. And still, each return to the temple felt colder. The halls no longer welcomed. The statues of old masters looked less like guides and more like sentinels. You began to wonder if the fire inside you was ever meant to stay contained. Palpatine's voice reached you not with seduction, but with understanding. He did not shame your fear of loss. He acknowledged it. He did not silence your rage. He offered it direction. He told you what the Jedi wouldn't, that death was not the end, that the Force could be bent, not just followed. And though your feet still walked the marble corridors of the temple, your spirit had already begun to turn. You looked at the archives, not for knowledge, but for permission, some ancient truth that would justify the storm rising in your chest. But the texts were silent. The holocrons spoke only of restraint. And then the moment came, betrayal, revelation, fire. The temple did not fall in a single day, but it began with a choice. When you returned with orders not from the Jedi, but from the shadows, you did not hesitate. The younglings looked up at you, not with suspicion, but with trust, and you, blade ignited, eyes darkening, gave them oblivion. The fire rose, statues fell, sabers clashed, and as you moved through the smoke and ruin, your name crumbled behind you like ash. You were no longer Anakin, no longer knight, no longer student. You were something older, something raw. The temple burned, and with it, the silence. You danced. Through it all, a figure of flame in halls once sacred, and when it was done, the order that raised you was no more. Only the mask remained. Only the fire. Only you. You carry the silence of the temple with you into the void, but it does not weep. It watches. It judges. It clings to your back like a second shadow that never forgets. The mask is your face now, not as concealment, but as confession. This is who you chose to become. The halls of the Death Star are colder than the temple ever was, lined with steel, with breath, with whispers of systems broken into submission. You no longer walk as a Jedi, but as a weapon whose mercy was carved away long ago. Flinch at your presence. Officers choke on your silence. You do not raise your voice. You raise the gravity of your existence. The Force coils around your limbs, not like a river, but a blade. It obeys. It devours. It remembers. Every command you give is precise, final, absolute. The echo of a boy who once begged for control over death, now granting it in reverse, in silence. Yet, behind the machinery, behind the mission, there is something deeper, pressing against your RIBS memory. It does not vanish. It flickers in dreams you refuse to name. You see her, not often, not clearly, but enough. Padma in sunlight. Padma with hands over her belly. Padma with tears you caused and promises you broke. And behind her, always, that impossible scream, you were supposed to bring balance. But what is balance when the galaxy has never known peace? What is justice when your name has been reduced to fear? The Emperor sits on his throne, pale and eternal, speaking of destiny. As though it is a script you never wrote, he tells you where to go, whom to kill, what must be crushed. You obey, but the obedience grows heavier, bitter, rusted. The galaxy falls into place, but something inside you unravels, thread by thread. Then, like a whisper across lifetimes, the Force shifts. A boy, a presence, a mirror. You feel him before you know him, before you see his face, before you hear his name. Luke, the son you did not know, but always feared might exist, the child of your blood, the last flame of a fire you thought extinguished. You hunt him not for vengeance, but for necessity. If he becomes Jedi, he becomes enemy. If he becomes Jedi, he becomes hope, and hope is the most dangerous thing of all. He is reckless, like you, brave, like her. His saber hums with your legacy, and when you face him in the cold of Bespin, he does not cower. He bleeds, but does not bow. You strike, but not to kill. Somewhere you hope he'll listen. Somewhere you offer not death, but truth. I am your father. You say it not as threat, but as plea. Join me. Understand me. Let us rebuild what was stolen from us. But he falls. He falls away from you, from power, from destiny. And still he returns, again and again, through forests, through war, through darkness. He calls your name, not Darth, but Anakin, a name the wind has not spoken in decades. He sees through the armor. He believes not in your deeds, but in your ghost. And that is the beginning of the fracture, the first true wound. You are not meant to be loved. Not anymore, and yet he does. You do not understand it, cannot contain it. He comes to ender willingly, offers himself, walks beside you like a son visiting a grave. You warn him. It is too late for you. The chains are too deep, the mask too fused. But he only looks at you and says, "There is still good in you." Those words echo louder than blasters. They pull at threads you thought were ash. And when he stands before the Emperor, beaten, burning, broken, and still refuses to turn, when he screams in agony and the throne room glows with lightning, something ancient in you breaks. The temple, the dreams, the betrayal, the child, the fire. It all crashes into one moment, one scream, one choice. You lift the Emperor with hands not of metal, but of memory. You hurl him into the abyss, not with rage, but with release. And it costs you everything. Circuits fail, flesh fails, vision fades. And as the end closes in, you ask to see him, not as apprentice, not as Jedi, but as son. Luke removes the mask. For the first time, you feel air on your face again. Not the air of war, but of peace. Your breath is shallow, your voice quiet. But in that final moment, you are not Vader. You are not fallen. You are Father. And the Force welcomes you not with judgment, but with arms wide open. The darkness recedes. The fire cools. The silence, at last, is kind. You drift now beyond breath, past the edge of memory where time unravels and the stars no longer hold names. Only feelings, only echoes, only light. Your form no longer bound by armor or shadow, but moving as wind moves through leaves, as thought moves through silence. You do not awaken, for awakening is for those still trapped by flesh. You simply become slowly, softly, returning not to who you were, but to what you truly are beneath all masks. The Force cradles you not as judgment, but as homecoming. And in this boundless current, you sense her again, Padma, no longer weeping, no longer fading, but whole, her presence like sunlight on skin after endless winter. And beside her, the child who never was born into your arms, but now sees you without fear. Around you, other voices, stir Qui-Gon, whispering with patient grace. Obi-Wan, no longer rigid with duty, but softened by sorrow and truth. You are not alone, not anymore. The past you carried like a blade has fallen into dust, and even the screams you once could not silence have faded into lullabies. Yet still the galaxy spins, broken and blooming, and your name begins to echo. Again, not as curse or warning, but as legend softened by time. They speak of Vader with caution, but of Skywalker with awe. They do not know how both names carved your soul, how every breath you took in that iron cage was a plea for something gentle. Luke carries your legacy, now not as burden, but as seed. He walks between light and shadow, not fearing either, because he has seen what love can resurrect. He builds anew from ashes, from pain, from the silence you left behind. But even he does not know the depth of your change, the cost of your redemption. For only the Force knows how deeply you burned to become whole. You do not seek to return. You do not long to walk among stars as a figure of fire. No, you are done reaching. You are done fighting. You are done falling. Instead, you drift where the Force breathes between stars, where suns are born and die without sound, and there you keep watch, not as guardian, not as judge, but as witness to the balance you once shattered and, in your last act, helped restore. Sometimes you feel Luke calling, not with words, but with worry, as the new world struggles to hold what it does not yet understand. You answer not with prophecy, but with presence. You are there in the wind that stirs when he chooses mercy, in the stillness before he draws his saber, in the warmth that clings to hope even when the sky is burning. You are no longer the hero, no longer the villain. You are the silence after, the moment between breaths, the hush that follows forgiveness. The galaxy moves on. Empires rise again, rebellions form, the cycle swirls endlessly, but you remain, not trapped, not punished, not erased. You are memory given form, flame cooled into starlight, and somewhere, in a hidden temple, where moss grows between stone, cracks and holocrons gather dust, a child sits cross-legged, eyes closed, reaching into the current, whispering your name as a question. And in the stillness, you answer not with thunder, not with power, but with peace. You are Skywalker. You are what remains. You are the quiet between light and dark. And now, at last, you are free. You remember the war, not as a beginning, but with peace dissolving like mist touched by dawn. And from the first moment your boots hit the dirt of a burning world, you knew the galaxy would never return to what it was, nor would you. The Clone Wars were not waged on maps or in speeches, but in corridors of crumbling cities, in the cries of civilians you could not save. In the brief moments of stillness when you stared at your reflection in the water and wondered if you were still human beneath the armor and the code. You were a Jedi, yes, but war is not sacred, and neither are the men it swallows. You were commander and savior, but also judge and destroyer. And with each campaign, the weight of it grew, not in your bones, but in your silence, in the way. Your voice grew quieter when victory was declared, because victory always meant someone else's home had turned to ash. The clones followed you, not because they were ordered to, but because they believed in you, called you general, with a reverence that burned your throat every time. You spoke their names and remembered they had no choice in their creation. Rex, Cody, Fives, Echo, they laughed, they fought, they died, and you began to feel more kinship with their sorrow than with the distant voices of the council that kept speaking of peace as if it had not already drowned. You watched as Jedi turned from seekers of truth into strategists, diplomats into tacticians, temples into war rooms. The Force, once a song in your veins, now pulsed with urgency and anger, stretched thin across stars, painted red. Ahsoka grew under your command, not as a shadow, but as a light trying to survive within one. And you taught her not what the order demanded, but what the war required. She learned to fight, to lead, to question. She grew into her name faster than you were ready for, and still you kept her close, not out of duty, but out of the unspoken truth that she reminded you of something before the war, something warm, something honest. But even that would crack, because the war was a river that took, and the day she walked away from the temple, from the council, from you, you did not stop her. You watched her go, and it broke something sacred. trust, perhaps, or the illusion that the Jedi were still right. That wound never healed. You buried it beneath battles and duty, but it stayed. You carried it like a phantom, like all the others. The Council questioned your emotions, your attachments, your loyalty, as though loyalty to the Republic required your heart to be severed from your body. They said you were dangerous. They were not wrong. You felt the darkness creeping, not as corruption, but as clarity. The war revealed things the Jedi refused to see: hypocrisy, indecision, the rot within the Senate halls, the coldness with which they turned away from pain they did not understand. You began to ask questions no one wanted answered. Why did the war start? Why were the clones born to die? Why did peace require so much death? And through it all, Palpatine stood like a statue in the storm, unshaken, ever present, whispering answers without judgment. He spoke of your strength, your passion, your potential. He told you that the Jedi were blind, that love was not weakness, that power was not sin. And when you doubted yourself, he did not. That was his true seduction. Not promises of empire, but understanding. You did not want the throne. You wanted control, peace, the ability to stop the endless spinning of the wheel. And slowly, without knowing, you stopped fighting the fire inside you. You began to feed it, not with hatred, but with desperation. You felt it every time a clone died in your arms. You felt it when your saber clashed against 1,000 others. You felt it when Padme smiled at you, already carrying a future you feared you could not protect. The war did not create your fall. It only revealed it. You were always dancing on the edge, and the Clone Wars lit the path forward. Each ghost you carried carved you open. Each shadow you whispered to answered back. And by the end, when the last order echoed through the galaxy, Order 66, the boy who once stared up at the stars dreaming of freedom, had vanished. In his place stood something colder, something sharper, something the war had shaped. You did not win. You survived. And survival always comes at a cost. You wore your armor like a second skin long after the war was declared over, because peace was never something you trusted again. Not after what it cost, not after what you became to obtain it. And so you kept marching, kept enforcing, kept obeying the rhythm of the Empire, as if it might drown out the whispers of those you lost. The echoes of brothers turned against one another, of temples turned to ash by your hand. The battles shifted from systems to souls, from outer conflicts to the slow erosion of what little was left inside you that remembered how to hope. You did not sleep, not truly, and when you did, your dreams bled red, red skies, red sabers, red eyes looking up at you in trust, in terror, in betrayal. The clones, those brothers of purpose, were discarded, forgotten, replaced by stormtroopers who never asked questions, who never laughed with you around dying campfires, who never called you general with pride in their voices. The galaxy became quiet in the wrong ways. Order came at the price of wonder. And yet, it was within this silence that you began to feel it, the trembling presence of something else, someone else, a survivor, a spark, a Jedi. You hunted them, not out of rage, but because the Emperor demanded it, because your own hands had already bathed in too much fire to hesitate. But each confrontation was not just combat, it was memory, a mirror. They looked at you as if you were still Anakin, and it broke you in places your mask could not hide. They called you traitor, murderer, fallen, and still you hesitated. Not always, not visibly, but inside, in the corners of your breath, where Ahsoka's voice still lingered, in the way your fingers sometimes tightened around your saber hilt, as if resisting something deeper than duty. You encountered her again once, not in war, but in the ghost of war, in the ruin of a cruiser, half buried in snow and silence. She stood before you with no fear in her eyes, only sorrow, and when she looked at you, she didn't see Vader, she saw you, and you, despite everything, did not strike. You let her go, or perhaps she let you. It didn't matter. The moment remained. It haunted you in ways the Emperor's voice could not silence, and still you obeyed. Missions, interrogations, extinguishing embers before they could become fires. You told yourself you were preserving order, preserving the very galaxy you once dreamed of protecting. But that was the lie that kept your limbs moving. The truth was simpler. You did not know how to stop. You did not know how to be anything other than a blade pointed at someone else's dream. The armor was no longer a choice. It was the only skin that didn't burn. You avoided Naboo, always. You avoided Tatooine, always. The places that still held memories were more dangerous than any rebel fleet. But sometimes you allowed the coordinates to flicker on your screen, just for a moment, just to remind yourself of what you refused to grieve. Podnam was gone. Shmi was gone. The temple was gone. The clones were gone. And yet, the boy you once were lingered, not as guilt, but as hunger. A hunger for something real, something soft, something true. You felt it most in the quiet moments between missions, when the stars outside your viewport looked too much like the ones you used to wish upon. There was no victory in the Empire, only motion, only control, and beneath it all, the growing presence of your son, Luke. Not just a name anymore, but a shadow rising, a force no longer whispering, but calling. He became a flare in the Force, bright, naive, unbreakable. And he did not fear you. He did not run. He challenged you, not just with a saber, but with belief. He spoke your name with reverence, not accusation. He saw the war inside you and refused to turn away. And when he faced you in battle, when his blade clashed with yours aboard a second Death Star, it was not rage that overwhelmed you. It was recognition. In him, you saw yourself before the ruin, before the fire. You pushed him, provoked him, tried to ignite the anger that once swallowed you whole. But he resisted. Even when he struck, it was to protect, not to destroy. He refused the Emperor's promise. He refused yours. And in the final silence, when lightning tore through his body and Palpatine laughed with the venom of centuries, you saw the truth, not in Luke, but in yourself. This was not order. This was annihilation. This was not destiny. This was damnation. And something broke. Something shifted. You remembered not the power, but the love. Not the war, but the ones you lost. And in that clarity, you acted. The Emperor fell, and with him, the chains. But the fire remained, not around you, but inside you, and it consumed what was left. You did not fear the end. You welcomed it, because, for the first time in years, you were not carrying ghosts. You were becoming one. You drift now beyond time, past the dying embers of warships and the shattered moons of forgotten battles, where memory bleeds into myth and the name Skywalker becomes not a wound, but a whisper on the lips of generations that will never know your face, only your echo. You are not bound to flesh anymore, nor tethered to armor, nor defined by the red glow of your saber or the black corridors of the empire that swallowed your soul. You are something softer now, not because the pain has vanished, but because it has been held long enough to lose its edge. You feel the current of the force around you, vast, tender, infinite, and it does not judge, only remembers. It remembers you not as failure nor monster, but as one who carried the unbearable weight of a galaxy that mistook prophecy for permission, who was torn between love and loyalty, and in trying to save both, lost everything. But now the war is over. The clones are gone. The temple is dust. The Republic is myth. The Empire is smoke. And in the quiet that follows Empire's fall, your legacy rises in strange new ways, not as monuments or statues, but as questions asked by children, staring up at stars, as stories told in twilight by those who still believe in balance. Luke stands where you once stood, but he walks differently, not as soldier or chosen one, but as a bridge between what was broken and what may yet be healed. You feel him often, sense the way his thoughts search for you in the quiet hours, not with anger, but with hope. He builds not temples of stone, but of compassion. He trains not in fear, but in understanding. And through him you reach into the world again, not with orders, but with presence. When Leia grieves, you are there. When Ahsoka listens to the wind on some distant planet, she pauses, sensing you not as Vader, but as something older, something sorrowful, something that once called her friend. Even in the minds of those who feared you most, a softening has begun. They speak your name not to curse, but to warn. Not all power is cruelty. Not all strength is blind. You have become a lesson, not of fall, but of return. And in the wild edges of the Force, where light and dark spiral together in colors no eye has ever seen, you remain not bound, not waiting, but watching. You are the breath before the choice, the memory before the blade, the sorrow that leads to peace. Sometimes, in the stillness between stars, a voice will call, not always aloud, not always knowing why, and it will say your name, not Vader, not monster, not traitor. It will say, Father. It will say, Anakin. And you will answer, not in thunder, but in stillness, in warmth, in light. You will answer with the quiet certainty of someone who has walked through fire and chosen, finally, to stop burning. And so the ghosts you once carried now walk beside you, not in chains, but as companions. Shmi, with her hands folded in love. Padme, with eyes full of forgiveness. Obi-Wan, no longer bitter, but calm. Ahsoka, not lost, but shining. All of them, part of you, and you, part of them, held together not by tragedy, but by the mercy of memory. You have become the space between battles, the silence between generations, the possibility that even after everything, one can return. And though the galaxy spins forward, its suns rising and falling over new wars and new wonders, you are still there in the unseen current that moves through all things. You are not forgotten. You are not undone. You are what remains when fire becomes ash, and ash becomes soil, and soil births light again. You are the whisper of balance restored. You are the story the Force never stops telling. You did not mean to love her, not in the way the Jedi warned against, not in the way the code forbade. But love is not summoned. It is remembered, recognized, reborn in the still places between longing and breath. And from the moment your eyes met Padme's again, After those years apart, the galaxy narrowed to a thread of light that led only to her, and you followed it, helpless, willing, burning. It was not her beauty that undid you, though she moved like wind through silk and sunlight, but her voice, steady, defiant, weary and wise, the voice of someone who had seen too much and still believed, who had stood before war and still dreamed of gardens. In her presence, you forgot the war's weight, the shadows in the temple, the whispers in the council chamber. You remembered Tatooine and freedom, and the child you once were beneath twin suns who thought destiny meant joy. She did not ask you to stay. She did not plead. She simply listened when no one else did. She did not recoil from your darkness, nor did she name it. And so you gave yourself to her, not as a Jedi, not as a warrior, but as a man aching to be seen before he was lost. The nights you shared were stolen, sacred, suspended from the laws of both Republic and Order, brief sanctuaries, where laughter bloomed and fear dissolved in quiet touches and whispered promises. You married her not in spectacle, but in secrecy, under Naboo's skies, where the lake glimmered like a secret the stars couldn't keep. In those moments, you believed peace was possible, that the war would end, that the child she carried, and yes, you felt it before she spoke it, felt it as a shimmer in the Force, as a quickening within her heartbeat, would live in a world untouched by what you had seen. But love, when hidden, becomes haunted. The more you clung to her, the more the future whispered in fragments, visions of pain, of her screaming, of death wrapped in silence. And the more you loved her, the more you feared her loss, until fear curled itself around every dream you touched. You told no one, not even Obi-Wan, especially not Obi-Wan, because love had become a secret too large for truth, and Palpatine, ever present, ever patient, saw it all. He saw the cracks where light bled into terror. He saw the way you reached for control like a drowning man reaches for air. He fed you legends of powers the Jedi refused to teach, powers to stop death, powers to hold onto what fate would take. And in your heart, where devotion once bloomed, now a question took root. What is the purpose of power, if not to protect the ones you love? Pod believed in you, always, even when your gaze darkened, even when the war swallowed your smile. She touched your cheek like it still belonged to the boy she met on Tatooine, and that gesture, so small, so steady, held you longer than any doctrine. But the shadows grew longer, the war dragged deeper. You began to blur the line between justice and vengeance, began to speak of strength as if it were the same as peace. She tried to reach you, you tried to explain, but how do you share a vision of death with the one fated to die? You held her in your arms and promised that everything would be fine, that your love was stronger than prophecy, that your power could rewrite fate. But even then, you knew the Force does not bargain, it only reveals, and in that revelation, you began to break. The Council's doubt became the final betrayal. Their refusal to grant you the rank of Master was more than insult. It was proof that they would never trust you, not truly, not fully, not with what mattered most. They did not know about Padme, but perhaps they sensed the storm behind your eyes, and still they sent you to spy, to betray, to choose the Code or the Chancellor, the Order or the only one who had ever said, without condition, that you were enough. You told yourself you could have both, that you could protect her, serve them, save everyone. But the truth was this: love had become your axis, your reason, your religion. And like all great faiths, it demanded sacrifice. You stood between two worlds as they collapsed into each other, the quiet chambers of the Jedi, who no longer trusted you, and the whispering corridors of Palpatine's promises, where love was not weakness but fuel. And though your feet remained in the temple, your soul had already begun to drift toward the one place that offered certainty in the face of your fear. You told yourself it was for Padme, that all your choices were rooted in her life, in your unborn child, in the dream of a future where you did not lose again. But beneath that hope pulsed something older, deeper, darker, the hunger to control what you could not bear to feel. You began to see the Jedi not as guides, but as guards, not protectors of peace, but jailers of truth. Their calm felt cold now, their detachment a blade drawn against your need to save her. They asked you to obey, to wait, to trust, but you had trusted them when they took you from your mother, when they told you you could not go back, when they said Ahsoka was a danger and watched her walk away. You had trusted them, and now every vision said they would let Padme die. And so you sat alone in the council chamber, bathed in sun from a sky you could not feel, staring across the sprawl of Coruscant, knowing that everything was slipping. Not just power, not just rank, but meaning. The Force no longer flowed with balance. It surged, unpredictable, storming inside you with every heartbeat. It spoke in dreams and dread. And when the truth came, when Palpatine revealed himself, not with anger, but with honesty, you did not strike. You listened, you questioned, you hesitated, because he did not hide what the Jedi did. He did not fear your power. He did not condemn your love. He offered knowledge. He offered the key to salvation. He said the dark side could save her, and that was enough. That was all you needed. And still, you tried to do what was right. You brought word to Windu. You gave the Jedi a chance to end it their way. But when you arrived at the moment, when you saw the blade raised against the only one who could save her, you chose. Not because you were certain, not because you were cruel, but because fear had made certainty impossible, and love had made cruelty seem necessary. One strike, one scream, one fall, and you were no longer Anakin Skywalker. You were apprentice. You were shadow. You were what the Jedi had always feared and never understood. You marched into the temple not as student, but as executioner. You lit your saber in halls that once whispered your name in admiration, and you silenced them. All of them, even the smallest voices. You told yourself it was for her. You told yourself you could not turn back. You told yourself that this was the only way to build a future where loss was no longer possible. And yet, when Padme found you, when she ran to you on the blackened soil of Mustafar, tears on her cheeks and love still in her voice, you did not see her. You saw betrayal. You saw the face of someone who might take away everything you had destroyed yourself to protect. You saw Obi-Wan, and rage, not grief, not confusion, but pure, blinding rage became your language. Your hands clenched, with the Force not to hold, but to hurt, and she fell. Not dead, not yet, but broken in a way that mirrored your own soul. And then he came, your brother, your teacher, your rival, your witness. You fought not for victory, but to kill the last part of yourself that remembered how to be loved. Mustafar burned around you like the truth finally spoken. And when the high ground betrayed you, when your limbs were torn and your body consumed by flame, it was not death you felt. It was the cruel mercy of survival. Palpatine saved you, not out of care, but out of need. He rebuilt you not as man, but as weapon. Metal replaced what fire stole. Silence replaced your scream. When you awoke in armor, in darkness, in pain, your first breath was not your own. Your first question was her name, and the lie came quickly. You had killed her. The one you did everything to save had died by your hand, and in that moment, your heart, what little remained, turned to ash. You did not cry. You did not scream. You simply accepted what you had become. You had loved as a star loves the void, completely, recklessly, radiantly, and in trying to hold her, you had collapsed inward. You had become gravity itself. You drifted through the years after her death like a shadow sculpted in iron. Each breath filtered through the machinery that replaced your soul. Each step a thud against the empty echo of what you once were. Not a man now, but a silence made of fire, duty, and ruin. Your love calcified into memory and your name erased by the hiss of a respirator that never let you forget who you had become. The galaxy feared you, but fear is not reverence, and no one spoke your name with tenderness anymore. They called you Vader, Lord, monster, never Anakin, never beloved, never husband, never father. You stood at the Emperor's side, a monument to obedience, a statue carved from pain, carrying out his will across the stars, destroying what remained of the Jedi, burning the last roots of hope with your own hand. And yet, even as the stars dimmed around you, she never truly left. Padme's voice lived in the quiet moments when the ship lights dimmed and the war machines settled, not as words, but as a hush in your mind, a flicker of warmth the darkness could not erase. You thought often of her laugh, of her hands, of the moment she placed yours on her belly and whispered, "There's good in you." That memory haunted you more than the screams. You tried to forget. You tried to bury it under the rubble of empires, but the Force does not forget. It remembers everything, especially love. And so, when your son appeared like a star reborn, carrying her eyes and your fire, you felt the tremble. Luke, not a soldier, not a weapon, but a question, a presence that did not recoil. He faced you not with hatred, but with belief. He reached for you when others ran. You fought him. You tested him. You tried to crush what he saw in you because it terrified you. No one had seen you for so long, not through the lens of fear or the armor of title, but as something lost. When he said your name, Anakin, it cracked the walls inside you. You told yourself it was too late, that redemption was for the unbroken, that love was a myth for those who hadn't sacrificed everything. But he didn't believe that he stood before you on the Death Star, not with defiance, but with hope. And when he threw away his saber and chose surrender, chose you, chose love, he did what you could not. He broke the cycle. He disarmed the past. And when the Emperor turned his rage upon him, when lightning surged into the boy who carried your legacy in Padme's light, you made a choice, not for glory, not for prophecy, not for power, but for love. You turned, you lifted Palpatine and cast him into the void, not as Darth Vader, but as the father you could have been. The fire consumed you again, but this time it purified, and in your final breath, when Luke removed your mask and you felt real air touch your face, It was not pain that flooded you. It was peace. You saw her then, not in vision, but in truth. Padmam, waiting in the space between worlds, her hand extended, her smile unchanged. You said nothing. There was no need. She had waited. She had forgiven. And as your eyes closed, you walked toward her. No longer Vader. No longer the fallen Jedi. No longer the frightened boy from the sands of Tatooine, but simply a man who had loved and lost and finally remembered who he was. In the Force, you remained, not as a ghost to haunt, but as a presence to guide. You were the warmth in the chamber when Leia cried. You were the hush in Luke's breath before battle. You were the star above the temple, the quiet wind that whispered, "Love is not weakness, it is the reason." And across the galaxy, though your name was spoken with reverence or fear, only a few knew the truth that you loved once as a star loves the void, and though that love could not hold you, it never let you go. You stood at the edge of Mustafar, not as a conqueror, but as a man who had already lost everything worth keeping, and the fire beneath your feet was nothing compared to the blaze within. For by the time the doors hissed open and Padme stepped forward, you were already falling, not through space, but through meaning, through love, through all the dreams that once cradled you in the silence of Naboo's gardens. And when she spoke your name, not your title, not your legend, but your name, it rang hollow against the steel you had wrapped around your soul. Her voice trembled, not with hatred, but with sorrow, and that made it worse. Because even then, even now, she believed there was something left inside you to save. Something untouched by betrayal. Something that still remembered why you once reached for the stars. You told her the Republic was a lie. You told her the Jedi were traitors. You told her you had brought peace, justice, security, but your eyes betrayed you, burning gold with the reflection of everything you had destroyed to get here. She cried not because she feared you, but because she still saw you, and that vision was too much to bear. You wanted her to join you. You begged her to rule by your side, to build a world where death could be denied and destiny could be rewritten. But she came with love, not ambition, and you came with chains. And when you saw Obi-Wan standing behind her, when your mind twisted her presence into betrayal, the ground broke beneath you. You struck not with reason, but with rage. You choked the air from the only voice that ever truly believed in you. And still, when she fell, your heart shattered, not in guilt, not in regret, but in confusion, in disbelief that she did not see what you had become as salvation. And then the duel began. Not between Jedi and Sith, but between two brothers who had once bled for the same hope. The air turned to ash, and your sabers became the language of all that had been lost. You were faster, stronger, burning with the fury of betrayal and grief. But Obi-Wan fought not with hatred, but heartbreak. Each strike was not to kill, but to reach, to plead, to mourn. You clashed through corridors and platforms, through lava and smoke, through the memory of who you used to be. You spoke of power. He spoke of failure. You called him blind. He called you lost. And when you leaped, believing yourself invincible, eternal, undeniable, he cut you down, not in victory, but in sorrow. You screamed as the heat consumed. You, your limbs severed, your body broken, your voice dissolving into a howl of rage and disbelief. The fire took everything, your strength, your beauty, your name, and still he could not finish you. Obi-Wan walked away, not as a victor, but as a man who could no longer carry the weight of your fall. He left you there, burning, sobbing, screaming, her name into the smoke. The darkness did not welcome you. It devoured you. You felt your body melt into pain so deep it blurred time itself. And when Palpatine arrived, cloaked in cold calculation, he did not weep. He watched. He commanded. You were lifted from the ash, not as a man, but as a project, as a tool, as a vessel. The mask was not your prison. It was your baptism. Your breath became mechanized, your body replaced with alloy and agony. And when you rose, when the table hissed and your fists shattered the metal around you, the first word from your mouth was her name, Padma. And when he told you she was dead, killed by your own hand, something inside you broke so completely it could never be named again. You did not roar. You did not cry. You became quiet. A silence more profound than space, deeper than death. You walked from that chamber, not with purpose, but with absence. The man who had fought for peace, who had dreamed of love, who had cried as a boy for a mother left in slavery, no longer existed. And the galaxy, sensing your transformation, did not pause. It flinched, it scattered. It began to fear your shadow long before it knew your name. You were no longer Anakin. You were no longer hope. You were what remained when hope was denied, when love was burned, when belief became weapon. And Mustafar, with its rivers of fire and sky of smoke, would remain not as the place you fell, but as the place where hope itself was cremated and scattered to the stars. You moved through the corridors of the Death Star like a shadow that remembered it was once flesh. Your steps neither hurried nor hesitant, but heavy with the memory of fire, with the echo of a scream that never stopped ringing inside your skull. For though your limbs had been reforged in durasteel and your breath remade through the machine, the voice that lived inside you still whispered her name in the moments between command and silence, still dreamed of hands you could no longer touch and lullabies you never had the chance to hum. You were the Empire's blade now, but your soul remained fractured, splintered between what was done and what was lost, between the boy who once built pods under twin suns and the man who destroyed temples under twin moons. The galaxy learned to fear you quickly. You did not shout. You did not threaten. You simply arrived, and the air bent around your presence like gravity. Officers stiffened. Dissent dissolved. The rebellion called you monster, butcher, machine, and still, in the quiet of your chamber, you closed your eyes and saw her face, not as she was on Mustafar, but as she was in the lake country, barefoot in the grass, sunlight in her hair, laughter not yet broken by prophecy. You reached out in dreams, not to grip, not to control, but to remember, because memory was the last warmth that had not been stolen. You told yourself you no longer cared. You told yourself that Anakin Skywalker had died. You told yourself that power was all that remained. And yet, when news of a boy reached you, when whispers of a name passed between spies and moths, something shifted. Luke, a name, a storm, a possibility. The son you did not raise, the child you never held, the echo of everything you had lost, wrapped in flesh and fire. You pursued him, not as a hunter, but as a mirror, seeking its reflection, as a soul trying to remember how to feel. He stood before you on Bespin, young and unbroken, wielding the same blade you once held with trembling hands. And you tested him, not just his skill, but his will. his eyes, his silence. And he did not break. Even when you severed his hand, even when the truth left your mouth like a confession carved from stone, I am your father. He chose the fall. He chose the unknown. He chose belief over you, and you watched him disappear into the clouds, your hand still reaching, not to kill, but to connect. And when he returned, when he came to you on Ender, in chains, offering himself not as prisoner, but as son, you faltered. He said there was good in you. He said he could feel it. You told him it was too late, that your path was fixed, your soul sealed, your fate forged. But the Force stirred again, like wind through the ruins of a forgotten song. And when he stood before the Emperor, screaming in pain, refusing the darkness, even as it burned him, something within you, buried beneath decades of silence and smoke, awoke. You remembered her, not her death, not her fear, but her love. The way she placed your hand on her stomach and whispered, "We can make this work." The way she reached for you on Mustafar, not to fight, but to pull you back. You had turned from that love, you had buried it. But now it returned, not as memory, but as choice. And in one motion, in one scream, in one final act of rebellion against your own despair, you lifted the Emperor in your arms and hurled him into the void, not for power, not for redemption, but for love. And it burned you again, this time not with Lifa, but with light. Your systems failed, your body collapsed, but your spirit, for the first time in years, stood. Luke held you as you fell. He called you father. And as your mask was lifted, as air touched your face once more, you did not see a dying warrior. You saw the boy you once were, the dreamer beneath Tatooine's suns, the lover, the believer, the one who tried. You told him to go, to tell his sister to live. And now, by choosing him, by choosing love, you had risen not as a Jedi, not as a warrior, but as a father finally come home. You are no longer bound to breath or bone, no longer tethered to the armor that once imprisoned your body and disguised your pain. For in death you did not vanish. You returned, not as shadow, not as weapon, but as light rediscovered, as memory purified by fire, as the silent wind that passes through the leaves of ancient trees where Jedi once whispered to the stars. And as you drift through the folds of the Force, you do not wander aimlessly. You listen to Luke, who grieves and rebuilds, who walks the fragile path between what you destroyed and what you saved, carrying your name not as shame but as seed. And to Leia, whose voice carries strength without bitterness, her hands shaping peace even as they tremble with the weight of what she lost and never fully understood. And you watch them not as a ghost with regrets, but as a father who finally knows his place is not to lead, but to protect, not to command, but to guide from the silence, from the stillness between stars. You see Padme too, in the golden places where time folds and sorrow cannot reach. She has not aged, has not dimmed. And when she looks at you now, she does not see Vader. She sees the man who reached for her in the dark, the boy who built angels from scrap, the father who, in the end, remembered how to love. You do not speak often in this new realm, because the Force does not need words. It remembers feeling, it holds intention, and in the long hush of galactic healing, your presence remains like warmth left behind on a blanket, like the faint hum of a lullaby once sung on Naboo, like the breath that follows a name spoken with hope instead of fear. The galaxy continues to spin. Rebellions rise and fall. Empires claw and collapse. New orders bloom from the scars of the old, and through it all, your name echoes differently now, not as destroyer, not as tyrant, but as the one who returned, the one who turned back, the one who stood in the fire and still reached for the light. Children of the New Republic read of Anakin Skywalker in hushed tones, not always knowing what was true and what was legend, but somewhere deep in the current of the Force that moves through all living things, the truth remains untouched. You were not perfect, not chosen in the way they imagined, not cursed in the way you feared, but human, entirely and painfully. A man who broke and burned and bled until the moment he remembered why he ever fought at all. And that truth becomes a light for others, for Jedi yet to be born, for souls who will one day fall and wonder if they, too, can rise. You are the whisper that says yes. You are the proof that it is never too late to return. And though the stars will forget your face, though the records may blur your deeds and cloud your name, the Force remembers not your power, but your choice. The hand you reached out not to kill, but to save. The moment you stepped from flame into light. You are not the fire. You are the moment it faded. You are not the fall. And though you once drowned in the smoke of Mustafar, you now move through the galaxy like breath itself, unseen, unheard, but always felt, and in that sacred silence, you are home. You did not wake one day and decide to rule through fear. It was slower than that, quieter. 1,000 small moments folded into the skin of obedience, until the line between mission and submission disappeared, and you were no longer the firebrand with vision, but the hammer with no hand of your own to guide it, a weapon turned inward, not by rage alone, but by pain disguised as duty. And so the throne you came to occupy was not made of iron or stone, but of breath, of silence, of all the voices you cut short in the name of balance, in the name of justice, in the name of control. You called it peace. You told yourself the galaxy needed order, that chaos had gone too far, that if others had listened to you sooner, none of this would have been necessary. But even as you stood upon the bridge of your Star Destroyer, surrounded by blinking consoles and trembling officers who could not meet your gaze, you felt it, the emptiness. Not the quiet of peace, but the vacuum of fear. Fear of you, fear of what you had become. And in that fear, you sat alone, not because no one dared approach you, but because you no longer knew how to be approached. The man who once spoke to droids with warmth and raced through desert streets with joy had been swallowed by the mask, not just the one of black durasteel, but the one behind it, the mask you wore in your mind, the one that said, "This is who you are now. This is what must be done." You crushed worlds, not because you hated them, but because you were told to. You chased Jedi across starlight corridors, not because you wanted to destroy them, but because their existence reminded you that you had once tried to be one of them. And with each death, each scream, each lightsaber extinguished, you built your throne higher, not with power, but with ghosts. You sat atop it, not with triumph, but with stillness, and in that stillness, you listened to the whisper that never truly left you, her voice. Padme, not in words, but in absence, in the way no planet ever felt like Naboo again, in the way no dream ever brought comfort, in the way your hand, now artificial, could never hold anything softly again. and you began to wonder, not openly, not dangerously, but in the spaces between orders and battlefields, if this was what she would have wanted. If the child you once were, wide-eyed and aching for meaning, would recognize the shape you had taken, and Palpatine, the voice you once mistook for guidance, offered nothing but more commands. He did not ask you how you felt. He did not care if you bled beneath the armor. He had given you purpose, and now he expected results. You were not apprentice. You were servant. You were executor of vision that was never truly yours. And still, you obeyed, because what else was left? You had already betrayed everything that mattered. You had already severed every tie. You had nothing left to lose, or so you thought. But the Force is not a ledger. It does not measure by power or rank. It remembers, it waits, it watches. And so when a name echoed through the dark, not yours, but one like yours, you felt it. Skywalker. Luke, a disturbance, yes, but not. Just in the Force. In you, a presence that did not fear you. A light that did not dim in your shadow. A boy who carried your blood and your fire and her eyes, and suddenly your throne felt colder. The silence you ruled over felt thinner. You pursued him not with hunger, but with hesitation. You offered him a place at your side, not with cruelty, but with the smallest hope that perhaps he could understand what no one else had, that perhaps he could forgive what you no longer had words for, but he refused, not with hate, but with compassion, and it stung. Not because he rejected your offer of power, but because he still believed there was something in you to save. And you, Lord of Silence, heir to fear, butcher of brotherhood, had no answer for that kind of belief. You had forgotten what it felt like to be looked at with love. You followed him not as a predator stalks prey, but as a shadow follows. Light it cannot comprehend, because Luke was not just a threat, he was a mirror, a wound reopened, a name spoken aloud in a room you had sealed shut for decades. And as he moved through the galaxy stirring rebellions, igniting hope, undoing what you had spent years tightening like a fist around the throat of freedom, you did not grow angry, you grew uncertain. And it was that uncertainty, that flicker, that terrified you more than any Jedi blade. He did not come to you begging for mercy or vengeance. He came offering forgiveness you could not believe you deserved. And every time he said your name, not Vader, but Anakin, it was as though he reached through the machinery, through the fire, through the years of silence, and placed a hand on the boy you had buried alive. You tried to crush it. You told yourself it was weakness. You warned him. You warned yourself. But even as you brought him before the Emperor, even as you watched lightning arc through his body and listened to the screams of a child who had inherited your pain, you could not stop seeing her Pab watching you from the other side of memory. Her eyes not angry but breaking, just as they did when you choked the air from her lungs, just as they did when she whispered that there was still good in you. And now that whisper had grown into a voice, into a scream, into your son. You turned not because you were certain, not because you were brave, but because the alternative, watching him die, watching your failure repeat itself, was a death too deep to survive again. You lifted the Emperor with hands not made for mercy and cast him into the void, and in doing so, you shattered the throne you had built from breaths you had silenced. It broke with you. It burned with you. It fell away like armor sloughing from a dying star. The electricity seared through your body, collapsing your frame, extinguishing your strength, but it freed you. For the first time in decades, you breathed without purpose, without orders, without fear. And in those final moments, when Luke dragged you from the wreckage, when your mask was removed and air touched your skin once more, you did not see darkness. You saw light. You saw his face, streaked with tears. You saw her in his eyes. You saw yourself, not the monster, but the man who tried. You spoke not as a Sith, not as a legend, but as a father. You said his name. You asked him to tell his sister. You asked for peace, and he gave it to you, not with a blade, but with a look, a belief that refused to die even as your breath slowed. You were not redeemed by the Force. You were redeemed by love. Not love earned, not love proven, but love given freely in spite of everything. And that love unmade the throne. That love reached back through time and stitched something whole again, something soft beneath the steel. When you faded, you did not fall. You became weightless. The Force did not swallow you. It welcomed you. It did not judge. It remembered. It forgave. It wrapped you in the warmth you thought you had forfeited. And for the first time since Mustafar, you felt still. No flames, no screams, no voices clawing at the edge of your mind. Just silence, just peace. And as your body was lifted into fire, on Endor, as the mask melted and the armor cracked, you rose, not in legend, but in truth. You became not what they feared, but what they hoped for. The one who returned, the one who turned, the one who proved that even the deepest fall is not beyond the reach of light. You are no longer the enforcer they feared, no longer the blade raised in silence, no longer the breath behind the mask, but something quieter now, something gentler, something returned. And as you move through the luminous weave of the Force, you feel yourself not drifting, but remembering, not vanishing, but becoming again, piece by piece, not as Anakin Skywalker, not as Darth Vader, but as the thread that ran through both, the story that could not be unwritten, no matter how far you fell, no matter how much silence you enforced, no matter how many hands you silenced in the name of a peace you no longer understood. The Force remembers not your titles, but your turning, not your power, but your pain, and it holds you without question, not as punishment, but as presence. You sense the galaxy without seeing it now. Luke lighting torches in the dark, Leia carrying strength beneath a crown of sorrow, Ahsoka walking through ruin with her sabers held low like candles, and through each of them you echo, not to haunt, but to heal. You are not what they carry, you are what they move beyond, and that is the gift, that is the grace. You do not speak in their dreams, but they feel you when they need you most, in the stillness before battle, in the decision to show mercy, in the moments when fear and hope collide. Your fall is not forgotten, but neither is your return. It lives now in balance, in the rhythm between darkness and light, in the space where one ends and the other begins, in the proof that even the mask can crack, even the throne can crumble, even the sword can drop. You watch Luke rebuild not a Jedi order of absolutes, but a path of compassion, one where love is not forbidden, where fear is not a flaw, where strength is not defined by how much can be destroyed, but by how much can be spared. You see the faces of children who will never know war in the way you did, who will never feel the cold certainty of choosing death to prevent pain. And you let yourself believe, truly believe, that it was not all for nothing, that the breath you silenced has now returned in new voices, stronger and freer and unafraid. You drift through the memories of those you once knew, Obi-Wan's final look of sorrow, Ahsoka's quiet departure, Pob Ban's trembling hand, and instead of regret, you feel release. You are not trying to change it. You are not trying to rewrite the end. You are simply present, finally, fully, without judgment. The Force does not demand you forget. It only asks you to forgive. And so, when stars blink into existence, when the children of the new age speak your name with confusion and wonder, you do not flinch. You let it pass through you like wind through old leaves, because it no longer defines you, it only reflects you. You are not Vader. You are not Skywalker. You are the fire that became light. You are the silence that learned to sing again. And in the ever-turning current, in the breath of all things, in the hearts of those who choose love instead of fear, you are home. No longer on a throne built from silence, but in the song that rises when silence finally ends.